Aelquilibra isn't a deck I covered in my preliminary deck list video, and that's because at that time I was not planning on picking up this deck. But the deck did interest me, and the price was right, so I ended up picking it up, and I have not regretted it. I've had a blast playing this deck, so it's the first deck I really wanted to cover from set 4, try out a slightly different video idea to cover it instead of the traditional deck profiles I've been doing. And really, the goal of this video is just to, instead of going over the deck list and the card choices, to instead go over the strategy, the winning image of this deck. What is it trying to do turn by turn? Just a big detailed description on pretty much how do I envision and intend to play this deck to give you all either a starting point or a point of comparison for as you're playing this deck. So with that out of the way, let's get right into this video. So I think there's no better place to start than the winning image of this deck. How do we intend to actually win the game? What are we trying to build up towards? And in this deck, it revolves around the Divine Skill and our 2 Drag Ritter Shaloobs here. So we pretty much want to get our opponent to 4 or 5 damage and have double Shaloob. That way, if my opponent's only at 4 damage, we use Divine Skill to get them to 5 and then swing in 5 times utilizing the Shaloob's restand effect. In addition to that, we would also like to have Persona Ride to give our front row 10k, as well as a back row of at least 2 overcharge units. That way we are maximizing our power for that turn and pretty much making our 5 attacks as threatening as possible. So now with that context, I'm going to show the deck list on screen, as this will give us context for the rest of this video and the turns leading up to it. I want to draw attention to this deck having 2 main normal unit support cards, that being our overcharge cards, which you kind of see on board as well once the image goes away or before that, as well as some additional pieces which are really focused around the early game of this deck. So pause if you need to, but we're going to move right along to discussing the first few turns of the game and what our strategy is. So this deck's early game strategy is pretty much just to push damage however we can. That way we get our opponent up to that 4 or 5 damage threshold. We want to be able to close the turn or close out the game with double Shaloob. And thankfully, we've got plenty of pieces to let us do that. For one, our grade 1 of the ride deck, Rocket Warfare, calls itself out when rode over by the Gatling Cannon Dragon, meaning we already have either attacker or a booster. But we also run other cards that are good in the early game in terms of overcharge pieces. We got the Eodil, which we can always call down if we have a counterblast to use its effect. This is where our non-overcharged units, our flex slots, come into play of Brachio, as well as Ford and Revertus. These cards are phenomenal in the early game for pushing damage, as they also do stuff unlike most of our overcharged units and can help us dig for more pieces or generate more resources. So typically, against most decks, we do just want to throw down a board of as many pieces as we can to be able to push damage, prioritizing making good columns with big numbers, because ideally we want to either be dealing damage or pulling cards out of the opponent's hand, making it easier to push damage later on. Now, of course, we can't always have Brachio or Foreign Revertus, but really any of the overcharge grade 2 or lesses can function for this purpose of calling down to aggress. The aggression is way more important than holding the pieces, because we have other ways to dig and find or recur our pieces in the late game. So really just push, 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 get that damage in. As for our turn 3, this is where going first and going second does dictate some slight differences between what you intend to do. Going first, we can't access our Shaloobs yet, so we just want to keep pushing damage with our 3 lanes and prioritizing just getting as much power gain as possible. Brachio and Ford Revertus still work great here, but another addition to help us push more damage with big numbers and still be drawing cards, digging for more resources step for a kill turn is the Pan-Shrek Dragon. This guy can swing in if you give the Aelquilibra its effect for 33k on its own and then tag itself out for a draw. I mean, you're also clearing up the spot because you don't need it anyway if we're going to overhaul the Shaloob. So this card, great for this purpose here. And it also gets into the energy usage of this deck. And this is also important for our going second turn 3. So in this deck, for our kill turn, our winning image, we need 6 energy for double Shaloob. What this means in terms of energy generation is we need to start that turn we intend to do that on 3 energy. That means going first, that typically we have, for however many turns we have until we get to that point, we have 3 energy to use. So in this case, on turn 3, we got 3 energy we can use. And that's why Pan-Shrek Dragon is a great use of that energy, since it accomplishes exactly what we want to do on this turn. There are other options to use up that energy, because of course we only run 2 Pan-Shrek Dragon in this list, but if you can find it, great utilization of that energy here, as well as if you need to buy, say, on your turn 4 to push up more damage, it can be another great use of the 3 energy you generate that turn. Now going second, we actually have access to Shalhoub already to be able to use since our opponent's Vanguard just has to be a grade 3 or greater, assuming everyone's writing up like normal, which they should be doing. But also going second, we have 3 extra energy because we do start our first grade 3 turn with 9 energy since we get it on the first turn. This means we actually can use up to 2 Energy Blast 3 users, meaning we can get in another get in a 4th attack on this turn to push even more damage or pull even more cards out of the opponent's hand, while also still being able to plus with something like our Pan-Shrek Dragon. So a lot of times this can be ideal, but also know that it's also flexible if you just don't have either a Shalhoub or a Pan-Shrekker Dragon, or you really are missing pieces and need to dig. You can always forego using the Shalhoub effect and prioritize one of our other Energy Blast 3 users, such as the Fallheart, the Guncycler, to be able to dig even deeper into the deck. And as I kind of alluded to already, on turn 4, if you're not ready to go for your winning image, you can just kind of replicate your turn 3 strategy going second, and just have potentially a Persona Ride on top of it to help you push even more damage. Though, of course, do be mindful if you did use 6 energy on the prior turn, you only have access to 3 energy, so a lot of times you might have to replace that Pan-Shrek Dragon with maybe a Brachio, or really just any piece in general. You just don't have access to the energy to use pretty much, or you can forego the multi-attack if you just need to dig for more pieces, as I mentioned before. If you've been enjoying this video so far, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload more content. With our turn-over-turn strategy out of the way, let's discuss the Mulligan, because the Mulligan can really set the entire pace of the game. And really, the Mulligan is quite simple. We just want to shuffle back in triggers for the most part. And there are some few cards that if we find duplicates, we also want to shuffle back in, such as our grade 3 Aelquilibra and Pan-Shrek Dragon, as well as our Order, because they don't do anything until turn 3 or even turn 4 in case of Persona Ride. But in terms of all our other pieces, while some are definitely better than others, we just need pieces to aggress with, and our normal units are fantastic for that. So we just keep it. And even keeping one Pan-Shrek Dragon or one Order is still perfectly fine, because what it allows us to do, and ties into another point, and that I'll go over next in terms of the ride up, which I guess we'll just get into right now, is that we actually have a lot of flexibility in our discard to ride up. So we can keep something like a Pan-Shrek Dragon and discard it for ride up, because we have access to this Order to be able to recur those later on, starting on our turn 3. And this is a great resource to have. That way we aren't also just giving up fully on shield value in hand and being susceptible to our opponent's aggression as well. So really, Mulligan feels great in this deck, pretty straightforward. And the biggest note I have to say when choosing a discard for ride up is you just need to consider, what do I want to play this turn? What do I need? Because that will dictate what you want to keep to be able to play, because you want to prioritize that, and what you can discard. Final note is for the Mulligan, perfect guards. This is completely matchup dependent. If you know you're going to want a perfect guard to be able to block a big swing attack, especially since you'll typically be at a lower hand size because you're aggressing, definitely keep a PG in hand to be able to protect yourself and not just get blown out. But if it's a matchup where you don't need it, also Mulligan this back, because you'd rather find literally any other of these pieces to be able to aggress with or set up for later. Finally, let's go over the strengths and weaknesses of Aelquilibra as a deck. To start with the strengths, its aggressive early game is definitely a notable one, and to further emphasize how much of a strength that is, the level of aggression you can actually apply can be variable quite easily with very little, I shouldn't say very little, but with not as great an impact on the output of the deck as some other decks experience. Like, you can choose to be a little less aggressive, and that's perfectly fine. You can choose to try to be aggressive later, and this deck can do that pretty effectively. The second strength I have to go over is its high power output in combination with mid to late game multi-attack. They complement each other very well and result in this deck being able to push damage very easily, as well as having a very difficult winning image to actually stop. Most of the time, if I'm going for my winning image, it's just game right then and there. Like, I got to that point, I'm just winning the game. The third strength of this deck is its high resource generation and recursion capabilities. This complements the deck's aggressive nature very well, as you can start using those resources without having to worry about necessarily having to save them for later, because you can either generate more later, or in the example I gave with the discard for ride deck, that Order really helps with the recursion of specific units. That also complements its more aggressive nature very well, as if our opponent starts to pick off our pieces, we can still recur them later on. And finally, I count its resource usage as a strength because it effectively uses Counterblast, Soul Blast, Energy, as well as the cards in your hand to a extremely efficient degree. Like, there's no resource wasted in this deck, which typically means that it has quite the high output to complement its high resource use. On the flip side, its weaknesses, I think first and foremost, is that it is more affected by variance than some of the other decks that we see, and that is simply because its only way to gain advantage and dig for pieces is almost exclusively through draws. The only exception being the grade 2 write-up, and that's just a top 3, which really isn't that much of a boost either. So that just means that some games you'll find all your pieces and you'll feel great. Other games, it's a real struggle to just find some of your pieces, so your ceiling is very much, I should say, it's not so much the ceiling, you kind of hit more of a lower floor for your deck because of it. It doesn't necessarily mean you lose those games, but it definitely makes it so that your kill turns, it's harder to get to, and is easier to also block by your opponent. This ties into the second weakness of the deck, focusing around that Gatling Cannon Dragon. The fact that it bot decks the other 2 cards in the top 3 means that you can get key pieces locked to the bottom of your deck, because right now this deck has no way to shuffle itself. So COT or PGs you need in that top 3 and you choose not to grab them, well, they're going to the bottom of the deck, and that's that. Its final weakness is the fact that its Divine Skill just gets shut down if your opponent checks OT. Granted, that happens very seldomly due to the overtrigger being 1 per deck, but nonetheless, it definitely still hurts this deck whenever it does come up and can just completely lose you a game. It pretty much just shuts down your winning image turn. In conclusion for this deck, despite those notable weaknesses, I don't think this keeps it out of the meta, but rather keeps it from being a top contender in the meta. I think it's more than capable of performing, but won't be the best option in set 4. But now I want to pass it off to you all. What notes do you have about how you are playing Aelquilibra and the options you choose to run in your deck? I really want to use the comments section as sort of a forum to discuss various ideas and perspectives. That way you all can go check down there to see some additional ideas or insight on this deck. And if you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload more content. I'm also really excited to see what you all think about this video template, as it is a bit different, and I really like the idea, at least in concept, and recording it's been fun, so really just hitting that like button will tell me that you all do like that and want to see more of it, so please do if you did in fact enjoy this video. But with all that being said though, look forward to more content coming out real soon.